Hi, Bother Brigade. Here's what's bothering me today. Not enough people here in the West seem to be aware of just how bad the droughts in Europe are. I know maybe some people have heard about the second brutal heat wave of the summer that hit Britain, but it's kind of part of a larger and, of course, climate-driven trend throughout Europe. And that's what I kind of want to talk about here today, because not only have I, done the incredibly bougie thing of living in Europe for a while, but I, of course, still have some friends over there. And like the former host families are over there. So I still get some news from there. And the situation in terms of the major river systems all across Europe is pretty dire. And I think more people need to be aware of it. This is a picture of the Doubs River, which forms part of the border between France and Switzerland. It is very much down to a trickle now. Here is a truly terrifying picture of the once mighty Loire in France. This is a section of the Rhine River in Germany, which is incredibly important for German shipping and trade, and well, most of European trade, let's be real. And here's the Waal River in the Netherlands that has basically been reduced to a trickle. That disconcerting green that you're seeing on the right side is part of what remains of the Po River, which is the longest river in northern Italy, where they depend upon it for much of their crops and agriculture, and it's basically dried up just past Turin. This is the famous Thames in London, England, and it's pretty darn dry. And this is the Danube in Budapest, Hungary, and they have seen a 1.5 meter drop in the past 3 weeks. And this horrifying image right now is what remains of the Guadiana River in Spain. Many of these rivers have their sources in highlands or in the Alps or some other kind of mountains or hills somewhere in their respective countries or elsewhere in the continent of Europe. And so when you have climate change that reduces snowpack and snow accumulation in these areas and highlands and mountains, that means less water flowing down. And then also, as there's just more heat, right, it evaporates more of the water, leaving less to flow and form the actual rivers, which, as we see in the case of the Danube and also the Rhine, are actually incredibly important to trade. Lots of European barges carrying anything from raw goods to finished products are shipped out to major ports on the coast of Europe, both in the Atlantic and in the Black Sea. On top of those issues, in terms of like economic issues, there's also the fact that rising water temperatures, especially in rivers, basically makes it harder for fish and other animals in there to breathe. Rising water temperatures mean less oxygen, so we're talking, again, a livelihood for people or some kind of commercial fishery. So trout, bass, what the rare, Atlantic river salmons that remain in Europe, those are increasingly at risk because of the warmer water temperatures, especially as there's less of it, so it heats more easily. You see how all of this is a problem, right? In terms of feeding people and the economy, and also, crucially, allowing people to drink. The situation in Southern Europe, so like Italy, Spain, Portugal, the Balkans and stuff like that, the situation there is incredibly dire. For instance, some villages in Spain only had 4 hours of water available for a day. And several of these larger rivers, and I think the Guadiana in Spain, are very much used for hydroelectric power. So there are dams that then hopefully use that power. But unfortunately, right now, we are caught in this situation where, because of the sheer amount of water evaporation and the usage of it as well, because the economy, the conditions are so extreme that it's left Spanish reservoirs at 40% of capacity. In France, the government recently said that over 100 villages across the entire country were without safe tap water. And to add to all these problems, it's also an official stat that 2/3 of the country of France is facing a water crisis right now. And we haven't even talked about all the wildfires and everything that have been going on in Britain, France, Spain, Italy. Like, that's kind of just a new season basically there. So all of these things together, right, it paints a pretty grim picture. So what's the solution here? I'm going to sound like a broken record here, but the solution is to end capitalism. Capitalism is what's causing the sheer amount of, growth for the sake of growth, which is the mentality of the cancer cell, I remind you. And it's just, we got to keep growing. We got to keep growing. So we got to have the economy keep chugging along. But now we're already seeing that in many corners of Europe, which is one of the wealthiest and most developed corners of this single planet that we live on, they are suffering now. Their citizens are suffering. Their businesses are suffering as, wildfires cause shutdowns. There's, brownouts because of there isn't enough power to go around because there's not enough water in the reservoirs. There isn't enough water to navigate certain rivers. So it's cutting into their profits in that way and getting things out to market. So yeah, growth for the sake of growth isn't always good, right? And I know it's, easier said than done of just end capitalism, right? But this is the grim reality, right? Because a lot of people, let's be perfectly frank here, thought that, the third world is going to be impacted more by this. We should be able to manage and be fine. And turns out, no, because again, they haven't made the necessary investments and built the necessary infrastructure to prepare for the climate crisis that we are now in the midst of. They warned about this decades ago, and now, unfortunately, we are living in it right here, right now. And so for all the talk of, there's crisis after crisis after crisis in Europe, there are still minimizers out there. And there are still people saying, oh, no, this is fine. Remember when we just used to call this summer instead of climate change? And it's like, I don't even have the words to explain just how morally void these people are who say stuff like this. But unfortunately, this is the grim situation now for Europe. But it can be fixed. In fact, it is necessary for it to be fixed for the sake of the people and for the precious capitalist economy. It is essential for the survival of Europe and its people and its economies, and therefore a good chunk of the global economy, that capitalism come to an end and that we meaningfully begin addressing the climate crisis with the urgency that it very clearly needs. And it keeps showing us that it is a very real crisis that is affecting everyone. It's not just the global south. It's here in the global north too. And yet people continue to ignore that while this is happening across the continent and nearly no one outside of the people affected by this are talking about it. And that is what's bothering me today.